Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me from where and what time you're watching? Thanks.
My name is Jamie, and I'm 21 years old. What I'm about to tell you is something I still can't fully wrap my head around, even though it happened over a year ago. It was my third year at college, and I was juggling a double major in biology and environmental science. To say I was busy would be an understatement. I was taking 6 classes that semester, interning at a local research lab, and trying to maintain some semblance of a social life. Most nights I was buried in textbooks or hunched over my laptop, trying to cram as much information into my brain as possible. Our campus library was my second home. It was this massive modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows and rows of desks tucked between towering bookshelves. It stayed open until midnight, which was perfect for me because I often didn't start studying until late. That particular night, I had 2 exams the next day, so I was planning to stay until closing. I found a quiet spot near the back, sandwiched between 2 bookshelves. It was secluded, just how I liked it. No distractions, no noise. Around 11 p.m., the library was almost empty. Most students had already packed up and left, but I was still deep in my notes, highlighting furiously. That's when he showed up. A guy, probably in his late 20s, walked into my section. He passed several empty tables and for some reason decided to sit at mine. He sat diagonally across from me, setting down a stack of books and a notebook. I glanced up and he smiled at me. I forced a polite smile back and immediately looked down, hoping he'd take the hint and leave me alone. He didn't. After a few minutes, he cleared his throat and said, "Excuse me." I looked up, and he asked if I was taking a specific biology course. I told him no, hoping that would be the end of it. But then he launched into this story about how his professor was impossible and gave pop quizzes every day. I nodded along, trying to seem polite but not encouraging. I just wanted to get back to my studying. But he kept talking. He asked my name, and I panicked, giving him a fake one. "Mia." He smiled again and said, "You have such green eyes, Mia." That's when my stomach dropped. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't there to study. I decided to test him. I asked what his professor's name was, and he hesitated before saying, "Dr. Carter." I pulled up the faculty directory on my laptop and searched for a Dr. Carter in the biology department. There wasn't one. My heart started racing. I knew I needed to get out of there. I stood up, packed my things as calmly as I could, and walked over to the security guard at the front desk. I told him the guy was making me uncomfortable and that I didn't think he was a student. The guard followed me back to the table and asked the man for his student ID. The guy fumbled through his wallet, then his pockets, before finally admitting he must have left it in his dorm. The guard asked which dorm he lived in, and the guy stammered, clearly lying. Eventually, the guard escorted him out of the library. I tried to go back to studying, but my mind was racing. I couldn't focus. Around midnight, I packed up and left, glancing over my shoulder as I walked out the door. The campus was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every sound seem louder than it is. I was about halfway to my dorm when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but then I heard it again, closer this time. I started walking faster, my heart pounding. The footsteps sped up too. I broke into a run, my backpack bouncing against my shoulders. That's when I heard him, his voice low and menacing. "Stop running," he said. I didn't look back. I just ran harder, but he was faster. He tackled me to the ground, his hand clamping over my mouth. I tried to scream, but it came out muffled. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. "Shut up, or I'll kill you," he hissed. I thought that was it. I thought I was going to die right there on the cold, hard pavement. But then I heard voices, shouting. 2 guys from the dorms had heard me scream and came running. The man let go of me and bolted into the woods. I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. The guys helped me up and called campus police. I was in shock, crying so hard I could barely speak. The police arrived quickly and took my statement. They reviewed the library security footage and got a clear picture of the guy's face. They sent out an alert to the entire campus, and within hours, they had him. Someone had spotted him at a bar downtown and called it in. He was arrested that same night. The whole experience left me shaken. I couldn't sleep for weeks, and I still get nervous walking alone at night. But I'm grateful for those two guys who came to my rescue. If they hadn't been there, I don't even want to think about it. That night changed me. I'm more cautious now, more aware of my surroundings. I carry pepper spray and always let someone know where I'm going. It's a scary world out there, and you never know who might be watching, but I'm alive, and I'm grateful for that. Sometimes that's enough. My name is Sam, and this happened a few years ago when I was working at the community center library. It wasn't a big, fancy place, just a small, cozy building tucked between a park and a row of old brick houses. I was in my early 20s, juggling 2 jobs to make ends meet. During the day, I worked at a coffee shop, and 3 nights a week, I'd head to the library for the evening shift. It was quiet work, mostly shelving books, helping the occasional patron, and closing up after hours. I didn't mind it. I liked the peacefulness, the smell of old paper, and the way the sunlight would stream through the tall windows in the afternoons. But one Friday night, the library wasn't so peaceful. It was nearing closing time, around 8:45, and most of the staff had already left. It was just me and one other librarian, a woman named Claire. We made the final announcements over the intercom, letting the few remaining patrons know it was time to pack up. By 9 o'clock, the last 2 visitors, a college student and an older man reading the newspaper, gathered their things and left. Claire waved goodbye and headed out soon after, leaving me to lock up. Closing the library was a routine I knew by heart. I turned off the computers, straightened the chairs, and emptied the trash bins. The dumpster was outside, so I unlocked the front door, carried the bags out, and locked up again when I came back in. The library was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. I grabbed a cart of returned books and started shelving them, working my way through the fiction section. That's when I heard it, a soft thud, like something falling. I paused, listening. The sound had come from one of the aisles. I walked over and found a book lying on the floor. Strange, but not unheard of. I picked it up, slid it back onto the shelf, and went back to work. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time it was louder, like something, or someone, was moving around. My heart started to race. I set down the book I was holding and called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. Just silence. I walked through the aisles, my footsteps echoing in the empty library. That's when I saw it. Another book on the floor, and then another. They weren't just falling off the shelves, they were being thrown. My stomach twisted. I wasn't alone. I stepped into the open area near the tables and called out again, louder this time. "The library is closed. You need to leave." That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl, like an animal. It was coming from the children's section. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but I forced myself to move toward the sound. As I got closer, I could hear books hitting the floor, one after another. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I peeked around the corner of the aisle and froze. There was a woman, or at least I think it was a woman. She was wearing a tattered nightgown, her hair wild and tangled. She was pulling books off the shelves and throwing them, muttering to herself in a language I couldn't understand. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette with its strings tangled. And her eyes, they were huge black pools that seemed to swallow the light. I didn't say a word. I turned and ran to the staff office, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. When the operator answered, I stammered out what was happening, that there was a woman in the library, that she seemed dangerous, that I didn't know how she'd gotten in. The operator told me to stay calm and keep the line open. That's when I heard the banging. I looked up and screamed. The woman was right outside the office window, her face pressed against the glass. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and her mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile. She started pounding on the window, screaming words that made no sense. I dropped the phone and backed away, my back hitting the wall. The operator's voice crackled from the phone on the floor. "Sam? Sam, are you there?" I couldn't answer. The woman was trying the door handle, rattling it violently. When it didn't open, she turned and sat down in a chair, facing the office. She rocked back and forth, mumbling to herself, her eyes never leaving mine. It felt like hours before the police arrived, though it was probably only minutes. They found her still sitting there, still rocking, still muttering. She fought them when they tried to handcuff her, thrashing and screaming, but they managed to get her into the back of an ambulance. One of the officers stayed behind to take my statement, but I couldn't stop shaking. I didn't know how she'd gotten in. Maybe she'd slipped in while I was taking out the trash, or maybe she'd been hiding in the library all along. I didn't know what was wrong with her either. Drugs, mental illness, I never found out. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I closed up the library. I started checking every aisle, every corner, before locking the doors. I even started carrying pepper spray just in case. The library had always felt like a safe place to me, but that night changed everything. It reminded me that danger doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes it's already there, waiting in the shadows. My name is Casey, and I'm 22 now, but this story takes me back to when I was just a little kid, maybe 5 or 6 years old. We had just moved to a new town, and everything felt strange and unfamiliar. The memories from that time are hazy, like looking through a foggy window. But there's one day that sticks out in my mind like a jagged piece of glass. It's a memory I wish I could forget, but it's also one I know I'll carry with me forever. We had just moved to a new town, and everything felt strange and unfamiliar. The memories from that time are hazy, like looking through a foggy window, but there's one day that sticks out in my mind like a jagged piece of glass. It's a memory I wish I could forget, but it's also one I know I'll carry with me forever. It was a Saturday, and my mum had taken me and my baby sister Lily to the town library. The library was this old, brick building with tall windows that let in streams of sunlight, making the dust particles in the air look like they were dancing. I loved it there. They had a kids section with beanbag chairs, picture books, and a couple of computers with games. That day I was glued to one of the computers, clicking away at some pixelated adventure game, while my mom browsed the shelves and Lily napped in her stroller. After a while, I got bored of the game and decided to explore. I wandered through the aisles of books, running my fingers along the spines as I walked. I was looking for my favorite series, the Magic Treehouse books. I loved those stories, and I was determined to find one I hadn't read yet. As I turned down another aisle, I heard a soft noise behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. Then from the corner of my eye, I saw a man's face peek out from behind a bookshelf. He smiled and said, "Peekaboo." I giggled. At that age, I didn't think anything of it. He seemed friendly, and I wasn't scared. He stepped out from behind the shelf and crouched down to my level. "What are you looking for?" he asked. I told him about the Magic Treehouse books, and he nodded like it was the most important thing in the world. "I know where those are," he said. "Come on, I'll show you." He took my hand and led me to the section where the books were kept. I remember his grip was firm, but not tight. He pulled out a few books and handed them to me. "These are the best ones," he said, pointing to the covers. I thanked him and started flipping through the pages. He suggested we sit at one of the tables so I could read, and I agreed. We sat together, and he asked me questions. What my name was, how old I was, who I was at the library with. I told him I was there with my mom and baby sister. He nodded, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. After a while, he leaned in and said, "You know, there's a secret room downstairs where they keep all the really fun books. Want to see it?" I hesitated. I'd never heard of a secret room, but the idea sounded exciting. Before I could answer, he stood up and took my hand again. "Come on, it's just down here," he said, leading me toward a door I'd never noticed before. It was tucked away in a corner with a sign that said, "Staff Only." He opened it and gestured for me to go inside. The stairs were dimly lit, and the air smelled like old paper and dust. At the bottom, there was a small room with a few toys scattered around, a dollhouse, some blocks, and a table with crayons and paper. The man set one of the books on the table and said, "Let's play for a bit." I started to feel uneasy. Something about the way he was looking at me made my stomach twist. Then, over the loudspeaker, I heard a voice. "Casey, please come to the front desk. Your mom is looking for you." The man's face darkened. He walked over to the light switch and flipped it off, plunging the room into darkness. "Let's play hide and seek," he said, his voice low and strange. I froze. My heart started pounding, and I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. "I want my mom," I shouted, my voice trembling. "Shh," he said, moving closer. "Be quiet, or we'll get in trouble." I could hear his footsteps coming toward me, and I panicked. I turned and bolted for the door, my hands flailing in the dark until I found the handle. I yanked it open and ran down the hallway, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The stairs felt like they went on forever, but I didn't stop until I burst through the door and into the bright, familiar light of the library. I ran straight to the front desk, where my mum was talking to a librarian. When she saw me, her face went pale. "Casey, where were you?" she cried, pulling me into a tight hug. I told her about the man in the secret room, and her expression turned to one of pure fear. She immediately called the police, and within minutes the library was swarming with officers. They searched the building, but the man was gone. He must have slipped out another way. I remember sitting in a small office with a kind policewoman who asked me gentle questions about what had happened. I answered as best as I could, but I was still shaking. My mum held my hand the whole time, her grip so tight it almost hurt. We never went back to that library. My mum found a different one in the next town over, and we started going there instead. I never asked her about that day, and she never brought it up. It was like an unspoken rule between us. We didn't talk about it. But even now, all these years later, I can still feel the cold grip of that man's hand on mine, and I can still hear his voice in the dark. It's a memory that haunts me, a reminder of how quickly something innocent can turn into something terrifying. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't run. I don't like to think about it, but I do know this. That day changed me. It made me more cautious, more aware of the dangers that can hide behind a friendly smile. And it taught me that sometimes the scariest things aren't the monsters under the bed. They're the ones who walk among us, pretending to be something they're not. My name is Leah, and I'm 23 now, but this story takes me back to my sophomore year of college. I was studying journalism and creative writing, and my life was a whirlwind of deadlines, late-night study sessions, and caffeine-fueled all-nighters. I was determined to make the most of my time at school, but that determination came at a cost. I was always tired, always stressed, and always buried under a mountain of work. The campus library was my sanctuary. It was this sprawling modern building with glass walls that reflected the sunlight during the day and glowed like a lantern at night. The upper floors were quiet, with rows of desks tucked into corners and nooks, perfect for disappearing into your work. I spent most of my evenings there, especially when I had big assignments due. That particular night, I was working on a feature article for the school paper, and I was determined to finish it before the midnight deadline. It was around 10:30 p.m., and the library was nearly empty. Most students had already left, and the only sounds were the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustle of pages. I was sitting at a table near the back, my laptop open and a stack of notes spread out in front of me. I was so focused that I didn't notice him at first, a guy, probably in his late 20s, who sat down at the table across from me. He had a notebook and a couple of textbooks, but something about him felt off. He wasn't reading or writing, just sitting there, watching me. I tried to ignore him, but it was hard. Every time I looked up, he was staring at me with this unsettling smile. Finally, he broke the silence. "Hey," he said, his voice low and smooth. "You're here a lot, aren't you?" I nodded, trying to be polite but not encouraging. "Yeah, I like the quiet." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Me too. What are you working on?" I told him about my article, hoping that would be the end of it. But he kept asking questions about my major, my classes, even my hobbies. I gave short, vague answers, but he didn't seem to notice or care. He just kept talking, his eyes never leaving mine. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my things and told him I had to go. He stood up too, his smile widening. "I'll walk you out," he said. It wasn't a question. I hesitated, but I didn't want to make a scene. "That's okay," I said quickly. "I'm fine on my own." He didn't listen. He followed me to the elevator, then out into the cool night air. The campus was quiet, the pathways lit by soft golden lights. I walked quickly, my heart pounding, but he stayed right beside me, his hands in his pockets and his eyes fixed on me. "You know," he said, his voice casual, like we were old friends, "you're really pretty. I've noticed you around. You should let me take you out sometime." I shook my head, my stomach twisting. "I'm really busy with school," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't have time for that." He laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "Everyone has time for a little fun," he said. "Come on, don't be like that." I stopped walking and turned to face him. "I'm not interested," I said firmly. "Please leave me alone." His smile faded, and for a moment he just stared at me, his eyes cold and hard. Then he reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to hurt. "You don't mean that," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're just playing hard to get." I tried to pull away, but he held on, his fingers digging into my skin. I opened my mouth to scream, but before I could, a voice cut through the night. "Hey, let her go." I turned and saw two guys jogging toward us, their faces set in grim determination. The man let go of me and took a step back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Relax," he said, his voice dripping with false calm. The guys didn't buy it. One of them stepped between me and the man, while the other pulled out his phone and called campus security. The man glared at me for a moment, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. The guys stayed with me until security arrived, and I gave them a description of the man. They promised to look into it, but I never found out if they caught him. All I knew was that he was gone. For now. That night changed me. I started carrying pepper spray and a personal alarm, and I made sure to always walk with someone after dark. I didn't feel safe on campus anymore, not like I used to, but I also learned something important, that I wasn't alone. There were people who would look out for me, who would step in when I needed help, and that gave me a little bit of hope, even in the darkest moments. I still think about that night sometimes, about what could have happened if those guys hadn't shown up, but I try not to dwell on it. Instead, I focus on the fact that I made it through, that I'm stronger than I thought I was. And I remind myself that no matter how scary the world can be, there's always a little bit of light, if you know where to look.